Awesome. Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome. We'll just let people trickle in before we get started. Feel free to say hello in the chat. Um, yeah. So, we're so glad you could join us today for Voicemail Talks, a parent's guide to teens and porn. My name is Charlotte Kinlock. Pronouns are she and her, and I am the community lead at Next Gen Men, and I'll be your host for today. Before we kick off, I would like to acknowledge that I'm joining the call today from the unceded lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And I invite you in the chat to share where you're joining from. And I'll also drop a link to this really great resource called Whose Land, which you can use to find out more about the land that you are on. If I can multitask to the chat. There we go. So as I said, I'm the community lead for Next Gen Men. Next Gen Men is a small but mighty Canadian nonprofit working towards a future where boys and men feel less pain and cause less harm. And we do that by working to change the way that we see, act, and think about masculinity among youth in workplaces and through storytelling. And I also want to introduce Voicemail for those who may not be familiar and are wondering why this event is called Voicemail Talks. So Voicemail is the longest running pro-feminist men's magazine in North America. Next Gen Men recently became the new publishers of Voicemail magazine, and we're dedicated to continuing its legacy in exploring masculinity, gender justice, and social change through stories of hope, healing, and collective action. This event is part of Voicemail Talks, an event series designed to amplify the conversations sparked by Voicemail magazine. Voicemail Talks brings together experts, advocates, and allies around Voicemail's core mission of promoting positive masculinity and fostering discussions on how we can create a more just, safe, and inclusive world for everyone. So today I'm joined by Caroline Hayes and Stephanie Wright, who will introduce themselves before sharing their presentations. Caroline will lay the foundation for our conversation today by shining a light on why this topic is so important. Why do we need to be talking to our teens about porn? Stephanie will then walk us through a 4-step framework that you can use to open up and navigate conversations about porn with teenagers to ensure that they are developing healthy understandings leading to healthy relationships. After we hear from each of them, we'll have about 10-15 minutes for you to ask your questions. So please submit your questions to the Q&A box throughout, and we'll get to as many of them as we can at the end. The Q&A box is located at the bottom of your screen on the Zoom control bar. And just a quick housekeeping note to say this session is being recorded, and we will be sending out the recording to everyone who registered afterwards, along with some extra resources and contact information for our panelists as well. So enough from me. Caroline, over to you to tell us why it's so important to make sure our young people have safe, trusted adults to talk to about topics like porn.
Hello, everybody. It's so awesome to be with you all on this wonderful Thursday evening, as it is in Washington, D.C., where I'm based. But for those joining from other time zones, happy to have you here. Welcome, welcome. I'm going to kick off with a little screen share, as it were, and get us started. So, yeah, as Stephanie mentioned, Charlotte, Charlotte mentioned, I'm Caroline. I work with an organization called Equimundo Center for Masculinities and Social Justice. We've worked all over the world for around a few decades on engaging men and boys in efforts, initiatives towards gender equality and healthy masculinities. We do that through our key work in research, analyzing trends around masculinities, gender, power across the world, programmatic interventions and solutions designed to prevent violence, but also promote pro-social connection and behavior among boys and men. And then advocacy work, so advising, talking to politicians, talking to leaders throughout different communities. But yeah, I'm here today to talk to you a little bit more about the internet and porn in general, and some of the impacts that we're seeing on boys and their relationships. But this is certainly applicable to all teens and people of all gender identities. So we'll be doing a bit of a deep dive first into boys and their online lives, then talking more about the structure and the business of the actual mainstream porn industry, where most boys and teens are experiencing or interacting with pornographic material, maybe for the first time or continuously. We'll look at the impacts on boys' development, beliefs, and behaviors. And then lastly, just some ideas of what we can do about it, how we're thinking about practical solutions and strategies for engagement. But we'll leave the details of that in the hands of Stephanie here to talk us through more of that action-oriented discussion. So, and looking forward, if you have questions, pop them in the chat, pop them in the Q&A. Happy to answer any as best as I can. So yeah, let's start by first kind of zooming out 30,000 foot view, looking at where boys are. Increasingly, that's online. You know, the online world is really shaping how boys are learning about identity, relationships, masculinity. We'll talk a little bit about the manosphere and what that has to do with porn, but not too deep into that. Otherwise, you're going to have to sit and listen to me talk for 3 hours about that, which you probably have better things to do. But yeah, first I just want to ground us in this is how I grew up. I am a millennial, and I had MySpace and AOL Instant Messenger, even though my mom explicitly forbid me from having these technologies. And we only had a desktop computer at the time, so I didn't even have a phone or my own laptop, but that we literally had a desktop sitting in our kitchen of my mom's house growing up, and I still managed to have several AIM accounts and MySpace, and her, you know, forbidding of me using these technologies really had no no power over me wanting to connect with my friends and be a social human being when I was 12 or 13. So I just invite us all to think back about how we were at that age and what was really important to us, and you know, what worked well in order to have conversations with my mom about what I was going through. Her forbidding these technologies and not wanting to talk about them didn't actually invite me into a conversation about the types of things I was experiencing when I was actually using some of these spaces, both good and bad. And so with that, yeah, just moving us into a little bit more of a context setting, there's been a well-documented decline in face-to-face socialization over the course of several decades. And even though researchers and psychologists have developed frameworks to try and build social fitness skills in-person spaces, a lot of the spaces that boys and teens are getting information and are trying to build those skills are online. And so it's just becoming increasingly relevant that we really understand the way that these technologies work and how they do or do not contribute to healthy behavior and healthy communities. And so you can see here, you know, there's Discord, there's YouTube with 2 billion monthly active users, TikTok, etc., with some smaller numbers for the in-person spaces that traditionally have, you know, had male engagement like frats and Boy Scouts. And so this is a quick snapshot of some research we just published called State of American Men 2025, just asking, this is a nationally representative survey. It was actually ages 18 to 45, so a bit older, but I think it gives us a good insight into sort of the fact that online spaces largely attract men for a variety of reasons, and they're more often positive. You can see 94% just to have fun, for entertainment, to find community. It's not as if most people are going into these spaces looking for violent material or to perpetrate violence against others, even though there's a lot of panic around a lot of these online spaces, and that's very real and interesting and important to get into. Just starting from a place of the impetus for being in some of these spaces is just to have a good time and to connect with people. So with our research that we did a 6-month deep dive in some of the key mainstream platforms that young men were using. So TikTok, Reddit, Discord, Twitch, fantasy football leagues, YouTube. And what we found is that men are really consuming a broad assortment of topics like gaming, sports, fitness, etc. But really crucially, a lot of short form content and the way that those platforms were optimized are really specifically designed to keep users engaged endlessly. And we did a lot of focus groups and qualitative research with young men and users of a lot of these spaces. And that's what they expressed concern over, is sort of the addictiveness of some of these spaces and the trouble of like getting off of these platforms once they were actually on them. So we're seeing a nuanced take on how boys and young men actually experience these, where they're getting a lot of information and cool content, but also experiencing challenges that they will name themselves that we should be listening to. And so just a little bit more about what they were finding when they were looking for information. A lot of young men drawn into some of these online spaces through are looking for seemingly harmless self-help content, advice on self-improvement, workouts, grooming, how to present themselves, how to get skills and skills and wealth building information. And so just starting from that point, what we were finding was that a lot of the content that then got recommended to a lot of the young men that we spoke to and in the research that we've done sort of went down a more extreme version of a lot of those types of innocuous searches. So if you're looking for information on how to get a date, you're being met with kind of content about fulfilling the natural male provider role with these really intense sort of binary ideas of what gender means, how to establish power or status in a relationship, and blueprints for what you need in order to be successful. And so I mention all this because I think it's important as we hear more and more about the manosphere and what this type of content is doing, and sort of the panic that's ensued about it. I think there's a misunderstanding of the fact that the manosphere is this nebulous term that we're using to describe all different types of content with all different sort of forms of extremity. And so from someone who's not familiar with a lot of this content, they might think of the manosphere as like always promoting violence against women. And of course, there's violent porn. So of course, the manosphere is promoting violent porn. But as we see in a lot of the content, and some of these folks you might recognize, Theo Vaughn, Jordan Peterson, like really different extremes of kind of more misogynistic versus not as misogynistic content. And so you can see that spectrum of extremity here in some of this content. But a lot of this manosphere content is really like about how to quit porn, how it's addictive, how it's actually much more nuanced than we think. Theo Vaughn in this one clip behind the little clips, he's talking to Andrew Huberman, who's a very famous podcaster, many of you might be familiar with, and he literally says, I think porn addiction is bigger than alcoholism, it's bigger than divorce. And he gets into the context of like how he's had a hard time struggling with being addicted to porn, in his words, with Andrew, and they get into sort of the science about it. So I just mentioned this all to say is that when we enter in conversations with teens, young men about the manosphere, if we want to be talking about that, we have to understand that there's a lot of critical thinking and much more nuanced conversations even happening within the context of these spaces than we might be led to believe. So just to really unpack our idea of what and our assumptions of what we think it is that young men are seeing when they're going into some of these online spaces. This is an example of Hamza. He's a big YouTuber and content creator out of the UK. He's got a lot of pretty harmful content out there that I would, in my opinion, but he's been engaged in sort of the no-fap movement. And so the no-fap movement, some of you might have heard of this, but it's this movement where no-fappers reject porn as it's motivated not by like feminist critiques and the harm it does to women, but rather the threat it poses to men's sexual stability and performance, and more broadly the stability of the patriarchal order. So again, like as we're looking into different movements and online spaces of how people are talking about porn and boyhood and manhood, it's important to understand sort of the thinking and the ideology and the framing behind a lot of these types of conversations. So just highlighting a few different like elements of this sort of anti-porn movement that we're seeing online more. And now I want to talk a little bit more about like what is the porn industry? What is the mainstream industry? What are young men experiencing? What's the architecture of it? And really, I'm just going to distill it down in our limited time to this idea that porn isn't just content, it's a global commercial tech product now. It's designed and optimized to be profitable. And that's really, really important as we think about like if you're looking at a bell curve and you're looking at sort of the majority of the content that young men are experiencing and exposed to, it's much more about this sort of globalized commercial tech product that's very largely operated by this one company called ALO. And so some of you might have, of course, heard of Pornhub, but actually research shows that ALO owns 3 of the 10 most popular adult websites, including Pornhub, RedTube, and YouPorn, as well as production studios like Browsers, Digital Playground, Reality Kings. ALO, formerly known as MindGeek, it's based in Canada, and their platforms collectively receive massive traffic. Pornhub alone reportedly sees billions of visits per month, sometimes ranking among the top 10 most visited sites globally. And this isn't random user-generated content. These major companies like ALO use AI, bots, search engine optimization, facial recognition to push the most profitable content in all across all of these different platforms. So if there's one thing to leave you with, it's the idea that a lot of the porn that's reaching young men and teens is actually targeted, and it's designed to harvest people's data and understand how to get users watching more and more of the content. And so I would just encourage us to think about the porn industry as another large tech platform and think about the ways to address it in similar senses in a lot of ways. And so just to deep dive a little bit more into sort of innovations, where the industry is headed, the mainstream pornography that is most accessible today is widely available. It's often free, and it's largely targeted at a male heterosexual audience, although, of course, not all of the audience is male and heterosexual. It's typically a majority of the user demographics within when analysis and data does get released on some of these platforms. And so here are some of the ways that the industry is evolving. We're seeing streaming and bandwidth optimization, where developed adaptive streaming tech is being used for faster buffering, better video quality, under limited bandwidth. We're seeing VR porn become a thing. There's been a major investment in 180 and 360-degree VR experiences. Studios like VR Bangers is one of the leaders there. There's been integration in VR headsets with MetaQuest, Oculus, etc., leading to immersive POV or point of view experiences. Lots to talk about with AI and AI-powered recommendation systems that are being used on a lot of these tube sites, as well as AI-generated performers or voices that are emerging in some niche markets. And we're seeing, of course, the creator platform and direct-to-fan economy, platforms like OnlyFans, Just for Fans, etc., disrupting traditional porn studios and actually charging monthly subscriptions, tipping, DMs for custom content in a lot of these platforms. And of course, lots to talk about here, but there's, of course, a lot of ethical challenges alongside the innovation that's been happening here with deep fake abuse, can get into that, child sexual abuse material. Obviously, there's a lot of history there and a lot to talk about there. Privacy violations and just monopolistic behavior by dominant firms like ALO. And so now just getting into a little bit more to the gendered aspect of things, we're going to talk a little bit more about the impacts and experiences for boys. So just to ground us and say, we know that talking about porn has historically been a contentious topic. It's hard for a lot of people to wrap their heads around. It feels a little bit just like a private thing that we shouldn't have to talk about in public spaces. There's been a lot of like theoretical arguing about what it really means for society and the efficacy and the ethical elements of porn. But in moving towards a common framework for how we have these conversations and a shared agenda, I think we just want to talk about some principles. One is that the issue is not boys and teens' natural curiosity about sex and sexuality. A lot of the problem lies in the exploitation of violence for profit and the silence of adults on the topic and sort of the political infighting that has stalled meaningful progress in addressing some of the real issues that we're seeing. And engaging in this work, it's critical that we don't shame boys and teens for looking for information and guidance about sex. That I'm sure Stephanie will talk more about, but instead we want to affirm their right to safe environments where they can ask questions and express their fears and help develop healthy intimacy and relationships with chosen partners. As we're talking about this, we have to be questioning male supremacy in both the content of the mainstream porn industry itself, as well as the makeup of capitalistic extractive economy that's actually bringing billions of dollars of profit to a select few. And of course, getting into topics around agency, rights, and choice when it comes to privacy, as well as ensuring we are talking about access to age-appropriate information around sex and sexuality. So those are some of the key principles or elements of this conversation that we want to ground ourselves in before stepping into action and deeper conversations. So some of the things we know. Boys are learning about sex and sexuality online. This is from an Australian e-safety commissioner report, Excellence from 2023. They found 58% of teens reported that they've been unintentionally encountered online pornography. That's a huge number, right? It's like you're going on Twitter, you're going on YouTube, and what you're seeing in advertisements, etc., is sexually explicit material that you didn't necessarily seek out. 41% said that they learned most of what they know from sex online, more than any other source of information that survey had asked about. And lastly, importantly, 51% thought that online pornography had some positive aspects, including helping people their age learn about sex and explore sexuality. And I think that's a really important piece to really think about, especially as we think about folks who identify as LGBTQ and in the area that they're in. Talking about queer identities and queer sex might in fact be demonized, if not criminalized in a lot of cases. And so sometimes going online to look up information and having access to porn that does reflect their sexual identities, sexual orientations, can be like a lifeline for a lot of people. So that's not something that we should take lightly and really consider as we're having these conversations. Here's a good quote from a 17-year-old. I think porn should be taught in a way that doesn't make porn seem evil and life ruining, but in a way where kids know how to be safe and know that it isn't what real relationships are like. So all to say is that when you actually talk to young people, they have really thoughtful, nuanced, and incredible things to say about their lives and their and the types of content that they're seeing online. So this is just one indication of that nuanced perspective. Some of the harms that we've seen that's coming out of the research is that harsher pornography is actually reaching younger and younger people. And so in the UK, there was a study that came out a couple of years ago. They found that 50% of boys are actually seeing porn before the age of 13. So the mainstream porn is just becoming more accessible, as I think it's around 83% of teens actually use a mobile device in order to 83% of Pornhub traffic is on mobile. And so, yeah, we're seeing that it's become more accessible with different types of technologies, et cetera, and that it's just getting in the hands of younger people and in more extreme ways. We know that there are unrealistic expectations and messages around body image, pressure to perform, consent, and boundaries that exist within the confines of a lot of different of the pieces of the mainstream porn. Typically doesn't show cast members asking for or receiving consent to engage in sexual activities, or show joint decision-making or power sharing about what happens or doesn't happen. Of course, this is not all porn, but in the large majority of the mainstream porn that you're seeing on these free websites, which is what we're talking about. We also see instances of deep racism and sexism within the content analyses of a lot of this mainstream porn. We're seeing deeper links to porn and sexual aggression, although the research is complicated. And lastly, one of the harms is that the inability to talk about porn and sort of the gaps in the technological differences here are creating deeper fissures between parents and educators being able to nurture their sons and teens' healthy intimacy and sexuality. And so, yeah, I'm going to just brighten the mood a little bit more and talk a little bit more about how our research has allowed us to understand the problems, but also contend with potential paths forward. And of course, we'll hand off to Stephanie to talk more about this, but ultimately what can be done, we really need a multi-layered response and approach to how to move forward. Of course, promote healthy masculinity. It's what Next Gen Men and Equimundo do in every day of our lives. So we have a bunch of resources for what that actually means in practice, but can answer any questions about what that could mean in the context of porn. Really listening first. We're going to talk about that very soon, and fostering critical thinking skills. I'll give an example of some violence prevention and gender equality program that we have that talks about porn, but definitely policy changes are needed, or especially around tech regulation, which is the last one, compelling tech industry leaders to bolder action and harm reduction. So one quick example of gender equality and violence prevention programming. I'll pop the link in the chat right after this. We have a program, sex ed and healthy relationship program that's being piloted in DC right now called Many Ways of Being. And so it's a curriculum for young people of all gender identities, ages 15 to 19. Its overall goal is to reduce STIs and unplanned pregnancy, but also promote healthy, consensual, violence-free relationships. And there's a ton of youth voice in the design of the program. We have a session on sex and sexuality in media today. There's a really incredible kind of situation where we have a script where someone's hearing about an experience that a young guy has with watching porn, and a lot of the youth have, just from anecdotal feedback, have like clipped it and brought it to their friends because they thought it was like it really resonated with them. So that's one example. I'll pop the link in the chat. But really, thank you so much. We really owe it. I just want to end and say we owe it to young people to give them the tools, the language, the hope to imagine sexuality and relationships that's not scripted by a giant profitable industry, but really shaped by empathy, their own choice, and the connections that really bring them joy. So thanks so much, and we'll hand it over to Stephanie.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Caroline. Just to jump in and say thank you for sharing all of that information and like providing such a solid insight into what boys and young men are actually seeing online and why it's so vital for us to make sure that we are having those conversations with young people before the internet does, and providing a safe space for them to ask their questions. And just appreciate your kind of call to action at the end there to remember that the reason that we're doing this is for the health and well-being of the young people that we love and care so deeply about in our lives. So appreciate that. Just a reminder to everyone to feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A box as we go through, and we'll try and get to them at the end. But now let's switch over to Stephanie to help us learn how to have these conversations with young people. So Steph, over to you.
Thanks, Charlotte, and thanks, Caroline. You know, when you're listening to something and you're like, and you're like snapping, you're like, yes, I was doing that the whole time, but not physically, because I was like, there's a webinar going on and people don't need to see that. Anyways, hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie, pronouns are she, her. Very excited to be with you all today. I am the youth program lead at Next Gen Men, and I'll share a little bit more about me in a second. But sort of just to build on what Caroline was saying, we know why this is an important topic to be discussing, but oftentimes there are lots of great resources out there about how we can have these conversations, but sometimes they are not in one neat little fun package. So I'm going to go over a little bit about how, and building a bit on the why a bit as well, as to why this is really important and how we as the caregivers and the people that deeply care and are the parents of young people, why we need to be having these conversations and how we can do it. So just to before we jump into it, I just want to say that, every young person deserves the opportunity to learn about sex and sexuality in ways that matches their stage of development. And we know boys are curious about how to grow up in a healthy way, and sexuality is a part of that. Boys are curious about the world around them, and they want to know how they can show up as their authentic selves. And with so many influences in their life, and we saw a couple of those, and my algorithm thinks I'm a 13-year-old boy, so I see them all the time as well. It's just bombarding and all-consuming, and so it is our responsibility as adults to help guide young people in age-appropriate ways, right? And to come from a place of empathy. So a little bit about me. I am Next Gen Men's Youth Program Lead. I've been working with young people, hundreds of young people, for over 10 years now. And the reason I say that is because, disclaimer, I am not a parent, but I have worked with hundreds of young people and boys. And within my work at Next Gen Men, I get to talk about professional development and go into schools and work with students. But also we run a online Discord community called the Next Gen Men Alliance. And within that space, we use gaming as a gateway for connection, for boys to have friendships and increase a sense of belonging with one another and participate in chats of all different kinds. And through those chats of all different kinds, often they bring up topics around sex and relationships and porn. And so having an insight into their world, one, I feel very lucky to, have that insight and to get to hear their perspectives because I learn a lot from them. But so many of them are feeling inundated with different messages around pornography. They're concerned about it with their friends. And they're really curious about sex and relationships. And they're really looking for trusted people in their life to be able to talk about it with. And before in preparation for this webinar, I started going around to like social gatherings and talking about porn with everybody. And I was hearing like the same story from everybody in the sense that like, in college and university, a lot of young women felt that their partners were mimicking porn and they were surprised by the actions that showed up there. And a lot of the young men I talked to described similar things that they were saying in hindsight, I didn't know. This is what I was seeing, and I was using porn as a guide. And it only took me getting into my first serious relationship where I started to understand what real intimacy was. But one story really stood out to me, and it was the only person I spoke to who said, "Oh no, my parents talked to me about pornography, like when I was, like 12, and before I ever saw it." And he said it wasn't awkward, and it made him feel more comfortable when he did see it, because he said, "I already knew what it was." And he also shared something that really like blew my mind, which was that by high school, he could see how it was shaping his peers. And he felt really grateful that his parents had provided him an alternative, a different perspective to think about it with, because he was like, I wasn't really interested in it because it wasn't real sex. Like I knew it wasn't real sex, so I didn't really like, it was just neutral to me. And I thought that was really interesting. And so oftentimes the way that this conversation can be focused around boys and men is like very deficit focused, or that, masculinity is toxic, dangerous, harmful, and so is their sexuality. And so I just really want to say, like, boys as curious young people who want to live healthy lives have the right to live healthy lives, just like any other person. And so want to orient like ourselves towards that sort of approach of like how us as adults can focus on setting up young people for a successful future. And I love this quote from Peggy Orenstein, where she says, "The ubiquity of internet porn means parents no longer have the luxury of squeamishness. We can no longer afford to not talk to our children, especially our boys, about sex." We know porn, and Caroline talked a little bit about how accessible pornography is online, and a little bit too about parental controls, right? Parental controls are great. However, it's so ubiquitous on the internet that it's hard to have every single site that could potentially ever have pornography on it controlled with the young people. And even if your kid doesn't have a phone, I was shown pornography when I was 11 years old through an iPod Touch passed to me by my classmate in the middle of math class. So it can happen anywhere. Peers will show it, and it's just ads. And the other thing that Caroline talked about was that, most teenagers are seeing pornography unintentionally. I think the number was like 58% from the Australia e-safety commissioner. And so it's happening even when young people aren't seeking it out. So really, it's not if your kid will see porn, it's when. And I'm going to talk a little bit about findings from a 2023 survey done by Common Sense Media on 1,300 teenagers in the United States. 73% of the teenagers reported seeing porn with over half of them seeing it at, 13 or younger. But the really concerning stat here is that 15% of them said that they had seen it at 10 or younger. So it really is happening younger and younger where this pornography exposure is occurring. And the interesting thing is, while most teens in the survey said that they had discussed relationships, sex, and birth control with a trusted adult, all of those were over 50%. Less than half said that they had discussed pornography specifically with a trusted adult, which is interesting because if you take a look at this table, and something that this survey found was that a large number of teens said that they wanted to talk to a trusted adult about their experiences with porn or about porn to learn more and understand. But they either weren't sure how to start the conversation or who to go to. And this uncertainty was even more common among younger teenagers, so teenagers who were 13 or 14. And nearly half of them said that they wish they could have talked to an adult but didn't know how to do that. Or around 43% of them in that right column, you'll see, weren't sure who to talk to about it. The other interesting piece about this research specifically, it was that this work found that when teens do talk to a trusted adult about pornography, the outcomes are often really positive. So teens reported that conversations about pornography left them feeling more equipped. They were happy to have them. They felt like they had more resources and things that they could turn to, that they had different perspectives for understanding sex and sexuality. And so that's like a really great reason for caregivers to feel confident in starting these conversations, sorry. But what's even more encouraging is that most teens describe these conversations as supportive and not shame-filled. So those who had conversations with a trusted adult said that the conversation helped them feel it was okay to explore their sexuality. And only a third of them said it made them feel bad about watching porn. So a majority of these people who were talking to a trusted adult about porn were saying, I feel heard, and I feel like I have more resources and I feel more equipped in handling adolescence and intimacy and moving into adulthood. So the porn framework, it's here. Really excited to share this. One thing I will say is that there is like a lack of research on porn literacy, right? Due to a variety of reasons. I'm sure you can all imagine that, getting research done on this is a challenging thing with young people. But from what some initial findings and early findings have seen is that porn literacy helps young people think critically about what they encounter, and it's an effective tool. So not only do we know that it's an effective tool, but we know that they want to have these conversations with trusted adults in their lives. But the real question is how do we do this? First of all, we need to prepare ourselves. I'm sure if you're a parent, you know that kids do not wait for the perfect moment to ask tough questions, right? You're busy going to work, you got like 90 emails in the inbox, you're freaking out, and then your kid in the backseat's like, Mom, what's threesome? And things happen unexpectedly. It's actually like one of my favorite things about working with young people is I can never guess the question that they're going to ask me. And it's always fascinating to get a peek inside what they're thinking. But moments like these tend to pop up really unexpected, right? And so it's our jobs to be ready for those and to understand a little bit more about ourselves, to make sure that we're set up for success when those things happen. Most boys are very tuned into adult discomfort, right? So if you're feeling uneasy, they're going to notice. If you're feeling awkward, they'll know. And so it helps us to prepare emotionally before these conversations happen, right? So if your kid is approaching these ages, it's like, okay, maybe I got to check in with myself about what's going on here for me. And the way that I'm suggesting parents do this is to take a moment to reflect on your own upbringing. So what did you learn about sex and porn growing up? Were the conversations open and supportive or awkward and confusing? what do you want to do differently for your child? I think like oftentimes we reflect on the way that we were raised and we see the really great things and maybe the not so great things, and we can pick and choose how we want to show up for the young person or for our child in our life. It's also really important it's helpful it allows us to get clear on the values that matter most to us and to respond calmly instead of reactively in those moments, right? To show empathy when your kid asks something unexpected. Your role is not to have all the answers. I'm just going to say that. Your role is just to be a safe place to have an honest conversation where your kid can come to you and land and feel comfortable, right? The next step is to open the conversation early. So don't wait for your child to bring up porn. Start the conversation before they encounter this. This is obviously like really challenging, and it's completely up to your discretion. And oftentimes, sometimes we're coming in and they've already seen it, and that's okay too. But begin by explaining what porn is in simple terms, right? It's videos or pictures made by adults that show people having sex, but it's not real life. It's a kind of entertainment that leaves out important parts like feelings, respect, and communication. And porn is really tricky because it looks real, but it's entertainment, it's a show, it's a performance. And just like that guy told me at this party that I was at, it's empowering to know something before you see it. So the example that I think about is if you were never told what a nosebleed was and you're like in gym class and you're a kid and all of a sudden you get a crazy nosebleed, you're going to be like, I'm dying. Like something is terribly wrong. This is super scary. There's blood everywhere. I'm freaking out. What's happening? And it's a similar case in terms of porn. When somebody sees it and doesn't have the knowledge or background before, it's a really scary, jarring experience. It can be. So talking ahead of time takes away that fear. When kids know what to expect, what's coming, they're much less likely to feel scared or embarrassed or like something is wrong with them. Having like these honest conversations early on builds trust. Like it shows your kid that they can come to you with tough questions or worries and that you're going to listen without judging them. It also helps them feel normal, right? Without any info, kids might think that they're the only ones going through these changes, or that their body is somehow broken. So giving them a heads up helps them see that this is a part of growing up and that this is a natural part of the media environment that we're in, which is, it is what it is, unfortunately. The next step would be to respond without shame, right? So parents oftentimes get left out of the conversation about porn. They're not in the conversation. For example, in one study in New Zealand, only 1 in 20 people actually brought up porn with a caregiver or a parent. And in another study with the E-Safety Commissioner of Australia, 80% of young people said that feeling judged, embarrassed, or shame was the main reason that they don't ask for help with the negative impacts of porn. And my colleague Jonathan has a great analogy for this. If a preteen watches Fast and Furious one night, they're probably going to come downstairs or come into the living room where you are and be like, that was like so crazy. But that's not actually how you drive a car, is it? But when it comes to discussing porn and how it's different from real loving relationships, many can't do that. And so the question is why? And we know the research shows that when parents react with awkwardness, anger, shame, kids usually just shut down and avoid future talks about sex or porn. And so the better approach is to stay calm and open, building trust and keeping the conversation going. The one thing I'll say is that when I'm told to stay calm, normally I don't stay calm. So the thing that I would say is thinking about, the timing of your conversation. When are you having it? Where are you? Oftentimes walking or driving in the car is a nice way to have difficult conversations because you can look at other things. How are you both feeling? Are you hungry? Are you stressed? Do you have an appointment in 20 minutes? Like all these factors are really important when thinking, is this the right time? And am I going to show up in a calm way? And finally, like remind your child that their question and curiosity is normal and that they're not in trouble. Talking about this is a part of growing up and knowing what you're seeing as you get older. And the last piece is to practice media literacy, right? So it's not just porn. As Peggy Ornstein says in her book, Boys and Sex, the real issue is how women are often shown as objects, degraded or overly compliant in a lot of mainstream media that boys see throughout their lives. And this is also true of pornography and mainstream media that objectifies people of different racial identities and LGBTQ plus people. And it really often centers tropes and stereotypes as a part of storylines. So helping your child think critically about what they watch, whether it's porn, manosphere influencers, TV, movies, helps them stay connected to issues. So using everyday moments is really important. So maybe watching TikToks together or watching your favorite show or watching a YouTube video together, seeing a movie, use those as opportunities to ask your child about what they're seeing within the relationships on screen, the dynamics, ask open-ended questions, be curious, explore more with them. And also introduce the idea of suspending disbelief. So that's the idea, that's what happens when we watch movies or shows. We accept that things that aren't real to enjoy the story. So for example, many boys love Spider-Man because, he saves the day, but they also know he's not real. So they're not going to go try to swing from buildings. And, another example is like Game of Thrones. Like, when I saw the dragon the first time on screen, I was like, okay. But then I suspended my disbelief because I wanted to enjoy the show. And I was like, no, the dragons are real. So we sort of suspend our disbelief in order to buy into the story, to feel, a part of it, to enjoy it. And that's entertainment. And that's also something that goes on in pornography, right? So these kinds of conversations help kids tell the difference between entertainment and real life. And they're a great way to share and talk about what values matter most to your family as well. Remember that you don't have to be an expert on social media or pop culture or anything like that. And the chances are you already are the expert on your own kid. So use that to figure out what they're interested in. Use that as the entry point to, watch a movie that they like and broach the conversation that way. Oh, I also forgot I put in a meme. Of course I did. But it's just about how video games also require suspension of disbelief. So if you want to, if they're into Minecraft or Valorant, you can also like connect it to that, right? And finally, you don't need to be a sex ed expert, right? You just need to show up. And your son or your masculine identifying youth in your life, or any child, really, they want to have these conversations. They want to feel equipped. They want to know what's going on. They're curious. They just need to know that there's a safe, trusted person that they can count on who's going to give them reliable information and advice. And these talks help young people tell the difference between performance and connection, between what they see online and what they deserve in real life and real connection with people. And it just doesn't have to be one talk, right? Like this does not have to be like the one big monumental talk, birds and bees talk, like small, honest connections over time, that really makes the biggest impact. And I know it's really uncomfortable, but the stakes are high, and I would argue too high to not have this conversation. And finally, I think I've said finally 3 times. I'm like really keeping everybody on their toes. I'm like, it's almost done. Just kidding. Haha. But just some resources if you're curious, additional resources. So the first is from Equimundo, the Global Boyhood Initiative. I just copied 4 that I found that I thought were great. There's conversation starters really about masculinity, about emotions, about just connection building with young people. They're not about porn specifically, but I think like starting out and having these conversations is like a great way to start and practice having and connecting and building that up with your child. And it's also great. So please feel free to check those out. And we'll be sure to send those to you after the call as well. And then also Next Gen Men, we have these wonderful talking tool card decks The cards for masculinity, like I literally sometimes use them at dinner. They're amazing. They just have questions to start conversation. And the boys will be blank decks are awesome to use with young people. They just list like 40 amazing qualities. You're like, I am kind, I'm compassionate, I'm warm, I'm engaging, I'm creative. And so you can use those in so many different ways, and ask questions with young people in your life. And we also have an individual course called Raising Next Gen Men, which is all about gender-based norms. It touches on academic research in the field, pop culture, and real stories about young people. So please feel free to check it out. And that is all from me. Also, this is the Discord server, another fake out. Some of our preliminary findings are on here, but if you're curious and you have a young masculine identifying youth in your life from 13 to 17, please feel free to get them to check it out. And you can go to our website and sign them up as well, and we will reach out to you. So thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Stephanie, and thanks again, Caroline. We have had some questions into our Q&A box, and yeah, we probably have some time for a couple of them. So this first one, I'll probably, direct towards you, Caroline. So this one says, you mentioned deep fakes briefly, and this is something I keep hearing about. What are the trends happening there? So yeah, do you have any kind of insight on what deepfakes are, what's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, so deepfakes are a very concerning trend, not just in the context of a lot of the conversation in media has been about sort of public figures having their images, likenesses, etc., be used for deepfake materials. I think Taylor Swift is like one of the big ones that sort of made a huge splash about it in the news. When we're thinking about sort of the relationship with porn, there's these apps like Nudify apps. Some of them, what was it? There was one a couple of years ago. I'll think of the name in a second. It's bothering me. Anyway, it's designed to basically nudify someone who's clothed and then project a naked body onto that person. And it was mostly used like over 90% of the time it was used on women or female identifying bodies. And they tried to use it on like a male body, and it actually replaced male genitalia with female genitalia because the app and these technologies are so biased and designed and so gendered. And so when we think about how like ethics and the future and how we want technology to be used for good, I think there's a lot to be said around a lot of these Nudify apps, their use cases, the need for them, and how we think about regulation of these. So yeah, definitely concerning data coming out about deepfakes, and not just in the context of like changing political orders because of their uses, but also thinking about the way it's reshaping gender power. And the other point I'll make is, there's been a very positive uptick in legislation around some of these technologies, and around non-consensual image sharing, etc. But what I am concerned about is the regularity and the amount at which young people are using them and don't necessarily understand the pace and the change of the legislation involved. So they might not understand that it's actually a crime to share non-consensual images, and then face repercussions as well. So I think there's just like, to the point of there being like a multi-layered, multifaceted approach to this. You can't just make legislation and not do the necessary public awareness raising and education about like why this is a problem, why it's becoming a law, and understand the need for that sort of element as well. And so that goes hand in hand with comprehensive sexuality education, of course, where that's being defunded across the country that I live in, the US. So anyway, lots to say about deepfakes and complementary laws that are coming with it, but just the need for more conversations like this to happen, and for communities, parents, educators to be aware of what those changes are and what that might mean for your child's just everyday life and social relationships.
Awesome. Thanks, Karen. And yeah, I mean, I feel like it's a topic we could go really deep into, but I can probably dig out some research and some information about changing legislation around deepfakes in North America. So I'll include that in the handout after the webinar. Okay, so this next question, there was a few questions that were similar to this. I think this is one that was put just in the chat, but yeah, so this one I'll go to you, Steph, for this. But at what age is this good to start talking about porn? So at what age should we start talking about porn with young people, and how do we bring it up if it's not like in response to a question that they've asked? And this person said, I think for all of us, it was awkward feeling the let's have the talk moment growing up. So yeah, like what kind of age, and do you have any recommendations of how to bring it up if they haven't asked the question?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that there are ways to have various talks that are age appropriate earlier on, and then I'm not, I don't think that you should necessarily go talking about pornography at a super young age. Like, you know what I mean? That's not what I'm suggesting. And also, this is completely up to a parent's discretion. Like, this is your child. You do you. I'm not here to tell you what to do. Like, I am not a parent. You know what I mean? Like, that is so just to be clear. But I think that starting to, scaffold those conversations early, right? And maybe starting to introduce what sex is, and using the correct words for body parts, and things of that nature. Introducing the idea of consent really early on. Like you can start teaching consent like 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? In really age appropriate ways. And there's a lot of really great resources out there on that. So we can also send that as well in the document. In terms of talking about pornography, I think given the recent research where we know that over 54%, according to this Common Sense Media survey, says that 54% of teenagers are seeing pornography at 13 or younger, I would gauge that as, maybe a number to consider as to when you want to bring it up. The other thing I want to bring up is I think and this is like a moment that clicked when I was talking to this person at the party, this young man, where he was like, it wasn't awkward because I didn't know what porn was. So I was just getting like I was getting told what porn was, but it wasn't it was, he was like, I could tell that, my parent was a little like weird about it, but for me, I was like, oh, good to know. Thanks. Like, cool. So I think oftentimes these conversations are actually a little bit more comfortable for us, in a way. I think if there is knowledge about pornography or about sex, like, yes, it can be an awkward conversation, but I would say, like, name that. Be like, I'm struggling to bring this up with you. I feel awkward about it, and name that, right? And I would say, just asking questions, being curious, and just trying to meet them and hear what they have to say and validating them. It's like, yes, I have seen porn. Okay. Thank you for telling me. Like, just so you know, you're not in trouble. It's okay. Do you want to tell me more about that? I think like also asking those questions of like, can we talk about this? I do want to talk to you about it. Can we? Is also helpful to have some buy-in.
Yeah, totally. Getting even their consent to have the conversation. Like it's always nice to solicit that micro yes before we kind of dive into these big topics. Awesome. So we're just about at time. So I don't think we'll have any time for more questions, although there are a number flowing into the Q&A box now. But I will send out Stephanie and Caroline's email addresses in the post-event email afterwards. So you'll be able to follow up with any questions that you do have. But yeah, as we close out, I just want to extend a huge thank you to Caroline and Stephanie for sharing their expertise today. These conversations are so crucial and we're so grateful to learn from you both. So thank you. And a huge thank you to all of you, our attendees as well, for being here. If you would like to join more conversations like this one, you can become a voicemail member. By becoming a voicemail member, you get a voicemail magazine subscription, as well as access to Next Gen Men's online member community, where you can join exclusive member-only workshops with experts on topics like this and other things related to gender, masculinity, mental health, and healthy relationships, as well as discounts on Next Gen Men products and offerings. And of course, it is the most effective way to support Next Gen Men's work in building a future where boys and men feel less pain and cause less harm. So to find out more about membership, you can scan the QR code on screen or go to nextgenmen.ca/support. In the next couple of days, as I've said, I'll send out a follow-up email containing the event recording, some resources, and of course, the contact information for Stephanie, Caroline, and myself. So yeah, just thank you all for being here, for your questions, and of course, for your commitment to raising the next generation of men. We look forward to seeing you at the next voicemail talks.
Thanks all. Take care.
Thanks, Caroline.